So there are these parents, this man and this woman, some 2,000-3,000 years ago. They have sex. She's walking to Pete's coffee shop and she runs into this woman. Let's call her Deborah. Deborah happens to be this magician, but not really. Just Deborah is this really, really wise woman. She is like Socrates' teacher, Diotima, very insightful about life, very insightful about human relationships, very insightful about love. In fact, Diotima, for those of you who are interested in the life of the great philosopher Socrates, the only thing that she taught him was the art of loving. She looks at this young woman and she says, "You just had sex." And this young woman says, "Well, that's rude. You're invading my space. I'm going to report you to my dean." No, you're pregnant. You're pregnant. And this woman says, "How do you know?" "I have powers, you know. But your life is going to be really, very, very sad." "Sad? Having children is fun. Having children is a blessing." She shakes her head. She says, "No, it's not." And this young woman looks at this older woman, Deborah, and says, "Well, tell me more. First, I don't really believe you." And Deborah sits her down and says, "Well, let me tell you what happened when you were 2. Let me tell you what happened when you were 12. Let me tell you that you liked a boy at the age of 16 whose name was Shah Rukh Khan." So this old woman tells this younger woman all her secrets. So if she had any doubts, the doubts are removed. And this young woman looks at this old woman and asks, "Is there any way that my child will be happy? Is there any way that misery will not come to him?" And the old woman says, "Well, yes, of course. One condition." "What is that?" "As long as he is not touched by the realities of life, he'll remain happy." The concept, ignorance is bliss. As long as you are ignorant, as long as you don't know, as long as life hasn't touched you, as long as you haven't fallen in love and have not been broken by love, you will continue to believe in love. You will continue to have your innocence. But the moment you fall in love and are broken by love, next time you want to go into a relationship, you go with a little fear, you go with a little doubt, maybe a little anger. So this woman goes home, looks at her husband and says, "I ran into this weirdo, by Lake Shore, and she told me that our kid is going to be miserable unless he never experiences realities of life." And so you're talking about a tradition where people take magicians very seriously, who at least claim to be clairvoyant, know a few things about people's interior, know a few things about future, how it's going to unfold. So this man, who happens to be a king, does something that most of us in this class will eventually do as parents. You leave downtown Oakland, you go to Montclair, Snakewood, you buy yourself a nice house away from civilization, and you make it a gated community. No one can just drive to your front yard without your permission. The moment you become a parent, you become paranoid. The moment you become a parent, your eyes automatically open. They're forced open, and you begin to look at society. And there's a good chance you're not going to like 90% of the things that society has to offer. You used to be very callous with language. You used to express yourself through profanities, but now that you have a child, you refrain from doing that. You used to smoke, but now maybe you still do, but just far, far, far away from your child. And when you come back inside, you make sure you don't smell like weed. The first thing that you need to get from this story about 3,000 years ago is the insights and the wisdom of this old woman. If you're going to be born, life is going to impose on you certain truths. Those truths will remove your innocence. Those truths will make you look at things differently. Those truths will make you miserable. Those truths will make you suffer. Do you really think that my parents had us knowing that they're going to send us to India? My father wasn't making very much money way back then in the 1960s, but because he just didn't like Persian education, he didn't like society. He saw himself and said, there is no hope in this country. People can't prosper. India has a good education, and it was known as an educational center in the 1970s. So they sent us there. And they had to eat bread and potatoes for about 2 years. That's the only way they could survive. They didn't want Iran to harm their kids. That's what happens the moment you become a parent. You begin to hate everything that lives in civilization. If you have a sister, who has rotten kids, you don't want to hang out with them. If you got parents who are angry, who drink, you don't want to be around them. If you've had friends who smoke or drink or use profanities or watch porn, you don't want to hang out around them. All of a sudden, you realize that you're just isolating yourself from life. Why? Something about you all of a sudden screams, life is dangerous. Remove yourself from life. In other words, every parent initially creates a gated community where no poison enters. One of the ways that his parents do this is by making sure a few things don't ever happen, at least in front of this kid. He's never going to see anything ugly. Sometimes, I hear parents saying, I'm going to send my kid to like soup kitchen so they can kind of see how homeless people live and how they are and what they are. So they could kind of widen their horizon, begin to think and reflect. And the truth is, you just need to wait. Eventually, the world will take your kids. You don't need to rush them into contamination. All you need to do is just help them how to think without exposing them to things they're not ready for. There is no one unattractive in that community. Everyone's attractive. And what happens when everyone's attractive? All you have are pleasure, positive feelings about yourself, about life. You don't see homelessness. It's like Prince of Bel-Air, for those of you who've seen that show. Carlton doesn't know what racism is. It's only when he gets pulled over by a cop, a white cop, as they're driving in the dark with Will Smith. And even when they're in the cell, Carlton looks at Will and says, well, the cop has just made an innocent mistake. And Will tries to tell him, no, it's not an innocent mistake. The cop is a racist guy. And then the father comes in. He comes in and he looks at the sheriffs and he says, if you don't release my kids, I'll sue you. And that's when they are released. But the point is, Carlton is a guy who lives in the Garden of Eden. Will Smith, on the other hand, he's been to hell and back, so he knows a few things about life. If I was to go around this class and ask you about love, and if you were comfortable enough to really, really open up, you would say that initially you lived in this gated community. You understood love through books, through movies, through novels, through the gossip of your friends, through YouTube. But the moment the gates opened and you in fact fell in love and got a taste of what love is and what it can do, if I ask you now, you say, well, move into love cautiously. Don't be so quick. And that is what the old woman is telling this young woman who's pregnant. Life is dangerous. When you have kids, all parents initially what they want to do is to protect them, but they will fail. But we still do our best. Remember the prodigal son? You do your best, but eventually kids will take your riches, will waste them, and they'll waste their youth and their time and energy. That's what happens. So, no ugly person in that community, no homelessness, no poverty, no sickness, and no death. He just lives a very, very happy life. It's like when you take your companion home and your mom says, he is an idiot, stop hanging out with him. And what do you say? Mom, what do you know? Your mom knows a great deal. You're just a punk. Siddhartha, which means someone who simply pursues physical pleasures, is about the age 19. And something awful happens. Remember when we talked about Henry David Thoreau and Mahatma Gandhi and Martin Luther King, that the worst thing that can happen to anyone in life is for them to run into someone at the right time, at the right place, where they are open and they are receptive. In other words, most often when life throws us an experience, we get excited and 10 minutes later we forget. Sometimes we think about the experience and then we forget. Sometimes if you are very, 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 very unlucky, an experience goes inside you and refuses to leave, and you begin to internalize. And as you begin to think about this experience more and more, it begins to occupy more and more space inside you. You guys remember my nephew who came to class last week with his friend Joseph from Cleveland? He's still here. So I had a call from my sister. He said, Amir, Arman wants to come and visit your class again. Is that okay? I said, yeah, it's okay. Can you tell him not to come visit you? Why? Well, he's been talking about these ridiculous ideas and he's thinking about like changing his major. He's like in dental school. Do you know how difficult it is to get accepted to a dental school? You know, it's not easy. And so I went to San Francisco yesterday and saw Armand, and his sister was there, of course, and his mom was there, my sister. And we tried to avoid anything philosophical. Why? Because his mother is frightened. She's scared, and rightly so. You know, he only has 3 more years until he becomes a dentist. But all of a sudden, should he come back to this class and should he be in the right place, there's a good chance that he may find what he's doing completely meaningless and irrelevant. And then what is he going to do? So, just in case you happen to be at the right time and the right place, now there are certain things that you should understand, which is sometimes there are certain pains and certain confusions and certain aspects of loneliness and misery that are actually quite delicious, that are really nice. They make you think, they make you cry. You become very, very, very creative. Now, is it true that you may become like a Gilgamesh? You grow your hair long, you grow your beard long, you wear a robe and you walk into a no man's land where there are no people. All of your friends are like crocodiles and reptiles. The Buddha is walking around, Siddhartha at this stage. He's walking around and he sees someone like me, lost a lot of hair, the beard is gray, wrinkles around my eyes and my face. My back is hunched a little. My voice is tired and weary. And he looks at me and says, "What happened to you?" "What do you mean, what happened to me? Why do you look like this?" "What do you mean? I am young. Look at me. Why can't you look like me?" So, well, that stage for me is past. So what is this that you're in? It's called old age, I tell him. And he asks me, am I going to be like that too? It happens to all of us. As time passes, it adds wrinkles. It removes your hair. It makes you gray. It makes you weary. But I have money, matters very little. But I have dreams, matters very little. Now, I see people who are much older than I am. They don't force reflection upon me. I imagine that I'm going to stay alive for the next 100 years or so. I never think about getting old. But the tragedy for Siddhartha is that he takes the experience in, internalizes it. What does it mean to be old? My age, that you have more time behind you than ahead of you. What happens when you get old? You review your life and it doesn't amount to much. What does it mean to get old? You begin to walk slower. You begin to lose abilities. What happens when you get old? You lose vitality and vigor. What does all that mean? Well, if life is going to take all those things away from me, how should I best use them? And so he goes to his father. And that's the second thing you need to understand. The moment you internalize an experience, what you want to do is you want to go to your friends and you want to vent. You want some closure, you want some healing. He goes to his father and says, "Dad, why do you look like this?" "What do you mean?" "I mean, look at your beard, it's all gray. Look at your hair, it's all gray. Look at your back, it's hunched. So if I'm going to be like you, if your riches, our money isn't going to save me, if being a king isn't going to save me, how should I spend my time and my life?" And Siddhartha comes to realize his father doesn't answer him. He doesn't know what to say. So going back to Amelia's question, let's just say that for a moment, we'll just make up a story, that she had an experience, that experience caused relationship, that relationship caused lots of emotions to flare up. Those emotions create attachment. In attachment, you give your identity to another. They become your son, you revolve around them, then you lose them. Then you go to someone who's a little older and you say, well, this person being 62 certainly have lost a few things in life, has gone through some grieving stages. Let me ask him, "Professor, what's the timetable for grief?" And the truth is, there is nothing that I can say and there is nothing that I can do that can silence or remove the grief that lives inside her. It's something you have to do on your own. And for the first time, Amelia comes to realize something. I have all these degrees. She even calls me a professor. But she has lost something when she looks at me. She has lost respect for me because I can't answer her question adequately. And in her having lost respect for me, she feels alone. A professor is someone who can profess, who can inspire, who can solve, who can give answers. And this guy, despite all of his information, knowledge, wisdom, supposedly, he can't give me any of those things. Why should I respect him? And then she comes to class and she plays with her cell phone. Why? She knows I have no answers to her big questions. Siddhartha's father can't say anything to him. People get old and there is no solution to that. But the story doesn't end there. As he's mulling over this experience, he sits in his room for a week being completely depressed. Then he says, I just need to go out and get some air. As he is walking in the streets, he sees the same man, me, and I am coughing like the way I have been for the past 3 weeks in this class. Why are you coughing? I've never coughed in my life. What in fact is that called? It's called coughing. Why are you coughing? I'm sick. Why are you sick? Well, that's what happens when you get old. When you get old, you give Kaiser more visits. That's what you do. But I'm young. Matters very little. You will get old and you will get sick. What happens when you are sick? What happens when you're in a grieving stage? When you're depressed? When you have lost meaning in life? When you have lost yourself in grief? When there is this hole you find yourself in and you want to climb out, but there are no ladders and there are no ropes? What do? When you're emotionally sick? Nothing. You can't do anything. You feel helpless and hopeless. And so he goes to his father and says, Dad, I saw you vomiting the other day. What is that? Sick. Well, when you're sick, who can help you? Nobody. But you're a king. You have all these people loving you. Why don't you invite them? In sickness, you want to be left alone. So if old age makes you alone, and if sickness makes you alone, what's the use of pursuing money and buying houses and governing people? In the end, what do we have? And again, he comes to realize that his father is incompetent. He can't say anything. And what you should at least learn from the story of Siddhartha, I don't even know if the story is historically true, but what you should know is the following. Whenever you internalize an experience, whenever there is real pain inside you, learn how to live with it by yourself, because no one can give you answers. You can find an oasis, an umbrella, a shade for 10 minutes, but eventually you have to go back to the place of misery, reflection, pain. Then after sitting in his room and being depressed for another few weeks, eventually he says, I need to go out and get some air. And again he runs into me. Am I old? Yes. Am I sick? Yes. But there is something very different about me today. And it's something I think about every night when I go home, or every time I put my head on the pillow to sleep. If my wife and my kids come to wake me for a cup of coffee, what if my body's a little cold? What if I remain unmoved? What if I am dead? And that's exactly what Siddhartha sees. I saw Amir when he was young. I saw Amir when he got old. I saw Amir when he got sick. And now I see Amir when he is dead. What happens in death? Nothing. You're removed from life. You're forgotten. In death, you become irrelevant. I loved my grandfather. When he died, I cried. I haven't thought about him for over 25 years. When my parents die, I will grieve their loss, but eventually I will forget. Every single one of my pursuits become meaningless. So the Buddha goes to his father and asks again, Dad, do we all die? Yeah. Now remember again the dangerousness of you listening to me, internalizing what I am talking about, taking the stuff home with you, talking with your companion or your friends about these ideas. And as you talk about these ideas more, you know what's going to happen. If your organism doesn't shut down, and if you keep encouraging this line of thinking and this line of thinking, they'll begin to occupy more and more and more space. And all of a sudden you realize you can't walk into life and have fun. Why? Because you think about time, you think about age, you think about vitality, and ultimately you think about how you should spend your time while you are healthy. That's one of the most puzzling things I see about Trump, an 80-year-old man who never looks himself perhaps in the mirror and says, man, I am getting old. And as you get older, you get sicker. And eventually you'll die. Maybe I should be a little nicer to people. These difficult events that occur in his life kind of makes him homesick. He doesn't have a home anymore. He doesn't know where he belongs anymore. He doesn't have a father. He doesn't have any friends. Remember what I said, the moment you suffer a huge loss, you feel abandoned and you feel all alone. And that's the story of the Buddha some 3,000 years ago. Life has nothing to offer him. Why? Because ultimately life kills him. There is this fourth episode that happens in his life where he goes out and he sees this man. And now remember, when you're thinking deeply about things, you don't smile, you don't laugh. Life is not funny. Life all of a sudden becomes a very, very, very serious business. The moment you want to recover from alcoholism or from any addiction, all of a sudden you become a profoundly serious human being. Or Siddhartha runs into Rett in deep reflection. He is mourning the loss of the fact that he is young but he can't have fun. The fact that he is young, he thinks about sickness. The fact that he is young but he thinks about death. And the fact that he's young but there is no place he can go to have fun. He looks at Rett and he sees that Rett is smiling. Why are you smiling? Don't you know that life is filled with sadness and misery and pain? Rett says, no, I have understood life. I know what life is all about. I have no home. I have no money. I have no parents. I have come to understand that I came into the world naked and I shall depart naked. All relationships are an illusion. Everything is a joke. You have to take it seriously, but it's a joke. Now, Siddhartha looks at Rett and says, well, I want to be like you. No, you can't. Get lost. This other version is the following. I usually come to this class with a cup filled with tea. And I usually leave the class with the cup filled with tea. I dump it in the garden outside. I don't drink it. And there's a good reason. I drank my first cup of coffee this morning at 4, then another at 5. Then I exercised a little bit. Then I drank another few cups at 7 and then 8. I got to the office around 2, drank a few cups. The first cup was so good. I hadn't eaten anything while asleep. And so when I woke up, I just pushed the button and this tea, coffee began to brew. Great. But the second cup wasn't as fun. The third cup, I guess I was just bored. The fifth cup, I guess I was more bored. The sixth cup, I think I was just in the habit of just making coffee, just hearing this coffee just dripping down. And then it made me think, it matters little what we do. Everything in life goes through these 3 stages. Initially, every experience gives birth to a desire, pleasure. You have fun. It's enjoyable. You fantasize about coffee in the morning. You fantasize about having a boyfriend or a girlfriend, graduating from school, getting married, having children, buying a house. They're beautiful. And then you get a taste of it. And then the second sip, and then the third and the fourth. And for some strange reason, your taste buds no longer inspire you the way they used to. And you realize something devastating. The taste of coffee has gotten old. It was fresh. It was a newborn. It was inspirational. But now, it's old. And you know what happens when something gets old? It's no longer interesting. In about an hour, I will dump this. You know why? It has no meaning for me. You know why? It is dead to me. I have no feeling towards it. There is no attachment. Imagine if you were to embody these 3 stages of experience. New, exciting, old, boring, and sickening, and then you lose interest completely. Can any of you in this class name anything that can last if every pursuit ultimately ends in you and I losing interest? What is then worth pursuing? Get married, knowing full well you will lose interest. That doesn't mean divorce. It means you understand the nature of human relationships. Have children, knowing full well that eventually you're going to look at them, but you won't see the innocence. You'll just see kids as a burden. As tiny little animals, you try to protect with all of your mights. And eventually you will walk away, if not physically, certainly emotionally, because you realize now they are 17 or 18. They have their own job. They have their own money. They have their own car. And should you push a bit too much, they will look at you and say, Mom, Dad, I've decided to leave. There is a reason why the monk in the last experience of Siddhartha's life is just laughing. He is very much in life, but indifferent towards everything that life has to offer. When you're indifferent, you can't love. You want to, but you can't, because you know too much, and you see too much, and you understand too much. You will fall in love despite everything that we've talked about tonight. Despite the fact that some of you in this class may even embody these ideas, you will fall in love. But you will fall in love in a profoundly detached way. You won't be as caring. Again, it doesn't mean you won't love. It just means there's a distance between you and the person or the object. Siddhartha has no money. He has no parents. He has no kingdom. He has no home. Since life can't offer me any meaning, maybe religion can, he says. So he goes to the forest, the place of purity and innocence, where organisms just grow organically. And he finds a few monks, and he sits with them, and he meditates, and he fasts, and he does all these tricks. And he has experiences, he has dreams, he has all the body experiences, I suppose. He respects some of the teachers he's working with. He comes to understand that dreams can inspire you for a week, then you'll forget them. Whatever it is that you experience under the sun, you will eventually forget. They will lose value. They will lose intensity. You won't feel much about them anymore. And Siddhartha says, I'm not here for a quickie. I'm not here just to have an experience. I'm here to understand. Now, a mark of a really good student is like the mark of a really good relationship. It's not just founded on sex. It's also founded on good conversations, on doing the dishes, doing the vacuuming, and sometimes just being alone, and sometimes being bored and being okay with all of it. Because you understand that is how relationships are, and that's how they function, and that's how they evolve and devolve, and that's how they fluctuate. The Buddha argues, the Siddhartha, that don't be like one of those people in Berkeley, who go to Bikram yoga and have an experience and talk about it endlessly. That experience doesn't mean anything. Just because you do psychedelics and you saw yourself sitting next to Jesus Christ and he said a few things to you, that doesn't mean anything. Experiences don't mean anything. If you want transformation in a real way, it needs to be through understanding, not simply experiences, feelings, emotions, thoughts. You need to understand. That's the only thing that will never ever leave you unless you get dementia. It's one thing to join a mass movement, going to San Francisco and saying, down with ICE, or down with Trump, or down with this, or down with that, and then getting back into your Hummer, and then driving back to Oakland and living the life that you've always lived. A waste of energy, a waste of money, just a waste of life. Someone who really understands their entire life revolves around that understanding. He comes to realize that these experiences don't mean anything, and these teachers, so-called teachers, they don't really mean anything either. So he leaves them. And then he sits quietly by himself, and he says to himself, I will either sit, think, understand, and then go back into life, or I will just die. Life is not worth living. I will suicide. Now, lucky for us, I suppose, the Buddha sits, he begins to reflect, he has an experience, that experience is accompanied with a good amount of understanding, then he comes back to us. And he has his own gospel, and it's called the Four Noble Truths. Now, initially, it used to be called the Four Golden Truths. You can have a soul that's made of iron, you can have a soul that's made of bronze, you can have a soul that's made of silver, or you can have a soul that's made of gold. So initially, before his teachings became contaminated, the Four Noble or Golden Truths are only reserved for those who have a noble or a golden soul, not for us.